Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Good Place and Philosophy. Everything is Forking Fine. Edited by William Irwin and Kimberly S. Engels. Foreword by Michael Schur. Narrated by Amy Mcfadden and Joe Hempel. Publisher's Note: Limit of Liability, Disclaimer of Warranty. While the publisher and authors have used their best efforts in preparing this work, they make no representations or warranties with respect to the accuracy or completeness of the contents of this work, and specifically disclaim all warranties, including without limitation any implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. No warranty may be created or extended by sales representatives, written sales materials, or promotional statements for this work. The fact that an organization, website, or product is referred to in this work as a citation and/or potential source of further information does not mean that the publisher and authors endorse the information or services the organization, website, or product may provide, or recommendations it may make. This work is sold with the understanding that the publisher is not engaged in rendering professional services. The advice and strategies contained herein may not be suitable for your situation. You should consult with a specialist where appropriate. Further, readers should be aware that websites listed in this work may have changed or disappeared between when this work was written and when it is read. Neither the publisher nor authors shall be liable for any loss of profit or any other commercial damages, including but not limited to special, incidental, consequential, or other damages. Editor's Introduction. Kimberly S. Engels. We are not in this alone. So, why do it then? Why choose to be good every day if there is no guaranteed reward we can count on, now or in the afterlife? I argue that we choose to be good because of our bonds with other people and our innate desire to treat them with dignity. Simply put, we are not in this alone. When Chidi reads this aloud in the episode Somewhere Else, he expresses the heart and soul of a show that succeeded in making philosophy both funny and mainstream. More than any work of contemporary pop culture, The Good Place explicitly explores the work of a variety of famous philosophers, yet it is anchored in one theme. As the show's creator, Michael Schur, said in a 2018 plenary session of the annual meeting of the North American Sartre Society, the goal is to try to ask the question what it means to be a good person. That was the one-line source of the show. Despite Chidi's desire for the first 3.5 seasons, perhaps there is no single philosophical answer to that question. There is, though, a narrative answer. Through the story it tells, The Good Place shows us that being a good person is social. It involves becoming better together through our relationships and bonds with other people, through our shared experiences, sacrifices, triumphs, and failures. Simply put, we are not in this alone. This is true not just for Chidi, but for all of us. Indeed, I have not been alone at any stage with this book, which has its origins in a meeting of the North American Sartre Society, NAS, in November 2018 at the University of Mary Washington. The NAS includes many supportive, collaborative, and remarkable individuals who are even better when together. Each year's meeting is filled with meaningful scholarship and companionship, but the 2018 gathering was extra special. The show's creator, Michael Schur, and one of the show's philosophical advisors, Todd, joined us for a special plenary session about The Good Place and Sartre's work. It was one of the most rewarding experiences of my professional life.
Foreword. In the summer of 2015, I found myself sitting in heavy traffic on a freeway in Los Angeles. Sitting in heavy traffic is one of our favorite pastimes out here, along with sitting in moderate traffic, inching along in light traffic, and canceling plans because there's too much traffic. On this particular day, a man in a white sports car decided the rules of society didn't apply to him. He is special. He has a white sports car. And he pulled into the breakdown lane and sped by all of us poor suckers who were foolish enough to abide by a social contract. That guy, I thought to myself, just lost 20 points. It was a game I played sometimes, a little soul-soother. I imagined that someone or thing is omnisciently tallying up our moral triumphs and failures, filing them away for review in toto when our threads finally get snipped. I'm hardly the first person to imagine such a system, but in my version it was a real numbers game, a cold, computational Moneyball-style analysis of our every action. This time, when I played my little accounting game, something else occurred to me. If this were the actual grand eternal system, whose computational rules would we be using? Would all moral philosophers even agree that white sports car man had lost a few points in that moment? Would there be a consensus as to how many points his act had cost him? Would their reasons for believing so be the same? And then I had one more, slightly less lofty, thought. Is there any way this is a television show? In the months that followed, I conceived of and wrote the pilot for The Good Place, a comedy on NBC that I've now run for the last 4 years. The basic premise, if you haven't seen it, though if you haven't, why the hell are you listening to this book, is this. Eleanor Shellstrop wakes up in the afterlife and is told that she is in the good place. Though it's explicitly non-denominational, the good place is a version of the Christian heaven, full of everything she'd ever want and reserved, she's told, for the very best people who ever lived. Humans' moral scores have been scrupulously kept, points added and subtracted for every action, great and small, and only the real cream of the moral crop get into this paradise. The problem is, she is decidedly not the cream of the crop. She is a very mediocre person who certainly does not qualify for this VIP club of ethical superstars. There's been a mistake. Then a million other things happen. That would take too long to explain. Just watch the show, it'll be easier. And also, again, if you don't know what happens in the show, why did you buy this book? In order to write the show the way it needed to be written, meaning not ignorantly, I embarked on a self-designed course of study into moral philosophy, a subject about which I knew very little. From my few courses in college, I remembered that Kant was strict, Mill was results-oriented, and Socrates was forced to drink hemlock because he annoyed everyone in Athens until they couldn't take it anymore. That was about it. I bought a few survey books covering the basics, virtue ethics, utilitarianism, deontology, designed to lay down a primer code of knowledge, ethics for dummies who write TV shows. The problem was every book and article pointed me to 5 others, which led me to 20 others after that. I bought more and more volumes, spent more and more time reading, got deeper and deeper into the philosophical weeds. My eyes were never unstrained. My Amazon cart was never empty. It was exhausting, but it was fun. Oh man, was it fun. It didn't feel like work, really. It felt like listening to a conversation. A 2,500-year-long conversation these men and, far too late in the game, women, were having with each other. The debates, the refutations, and criticisms. Scanlon was talking to Rawls, who'd been talking to Kant, who'd been sniffing at Aristotle. Philippa Foot was talking to Mill, and then John Tarek snapped at the people who'd talked to her. The ideas were fascinating, but the conversation was the fun part. And as long as humans walked the planet, it occurred to me, it would never end. As T.M. Scanlon wrote when concluding his magnum opus, working out the terms of moral justification is an unending task, which is why this volume delights me so much. When you start a TV show, you have very pedestrian goals. Make something good that entertains people. If you're lucky, you make something audiences care about and invest in, emotionally and intellectually. But this show had another clandestine goal, to add to the conversation. I hoped the show could toss out a few ideas, ask a couple questions, raise a hand from the back of the class. An entire book full of ideas based on its contents was something I never dreamed of. I'm very grateful to the academics who contributed to the pages within, and to the writers, actors, editors, and crew members who made the show sturdy enough in its scholarship to warrant those pages. I'm doubly grateful for everyone who watched the show and felt it contributed, in some small way, to the conversation of philosophy. Michael Schur, creator of The Good Place, October 2019.
Introduction. Pamela Hieronymi and Todd May, philosophical advisors to The Good Place. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once remarked that a serious and good philosophical work could be written consisting entirely of jokes. But who, really, has tried this? Who would have the chutzpah, not to mention the fortitude, to write such a book? And if such a task were beyond most philosophers, what about this? A television show of philosophy composed largely of jokes. If you're listening to this book, you already know that it's been done. Tacking between the Scylla of cheapening philosophy and the Charybdis of unfunny humor, the dreaded philosophy jokes, The Good Place has sought to engage philosophy seriously while at the same time remaining an entertaining sitcom broadcast on network television. In particular, it is focused on the questions of how to be good and how to learn to be good in a world fraught with ethical complexities. Although the show engages in any number of philosophical arenas, for instance, existentialism and the problem of personal identity, it always returns to the core issue of living an ethically decent life in a world that has the unfortunate tendency to push back. In doing so, the show does not cleave to one or another of the ethical theories current in philosophical discussion. It presents Kant's view, through the behavior of the academic philosopher Chidi, as a blind set of imperatives whose key is hard to discover and even harder to act upon. Consequentialism, on the other hand, comes in for critique in the form of the point system for getting into the good place. Consequences are impossible to calculate in a world where good and bad are so deeply entwined that even the most diligent of consequentialists, and who is more diligent than Doug Forsett, cannot pull off the trick of earning enough points to achieve proper good place standing. As Judge Jen discovers when she takes her short foray to the land of the living, acting rightly, if we base it on consequences, is far too complicated to master. In the first and second season, T.M. Scanlon's What We Owe to Each Other looms large. Contractualism offers a contrast to both points and imperatives, with its update of the Golden Rule and its focus on respect and concern for other people. It is not so much the particularities of Scanlon's theory that inform the show in its early episodes, although Chidi does present Scanlon's idea that we should act on principles that others could not reasonably refuse, but rather the primary role that the theory gives to interpersonal relationships. In the first season, it is revealed that, in life, Eleanor never felt comfortable being part of any group. She was a distrustful loner. Episode Someone Like Me as a Member. She turns a corner, though, when she convinces Jason and Janet that they all must return to the good place and sacrifice themselves so that Chidi and Tahani are not sent to the bad place. Episode Mindy St. Clair. Eleanor's first motive is friendship, but its connection to justice comes through. If there is a philosophical view that comes closest to what the Good Place puts before us, it would be Aristotle's virtue ethics. And yet there is no wise person, no sage that stands as a model for those seekers of ethical living. Instead, all Eleanor, Chidi, Jason, Tahani, and Michael have are one another, flawed human beings, and a flawed immortal. What allows them to improve? What keeps them on the path, even as, in the third season, they are convinced it will be impossible for any of them to enter the good place? In interview after interview about the show, Mike Schur returns to a single word: trying. Through their relationships with one another, they come to desire, and then to try their hardest, to become better people. Trying, though, has its own hazards. Eleanor needs to try because she lacks the motivations of a good person. Aristotle would recommend that she do what the good person does, as a way to become a good person. In contemporary terms, fake it till you make it. But sheer effort alone will not transform poor motives. Motives are not like muscles. Mere repetition will not affect change. To become a better person, your motives must be transformed, and effort alone does not guarantee transformation. In the pilot, Eleanor volunteered to pick up trash as a way of becoming better. She tried, but she couldn't stick to it. Later, though, when she realized Chidi's disappointment in missing his real soulmate, she was moved to kindness, without effort, and the sinkhole closed. Eleanor's resolve again flags when she's back on Earth, attempting to improve herself, but it revives when she hears Chidi's lecture on contractualism, with its emphasis on interpersonal relations. As the humans reunite on Earth and form friendships, their transformations begin. Aristotle's ethics is not, in the end, in tension with Scanlon's contractualism. Aristotle recognized that becoming good is not something that one does on one's own. Ethics, for him, is a part of politics. Becoming good requires other people. The Good Place turns the Sartrean dictum that hell is other people on its head. Michael tries to create an interpersonal hell for Eleanor and the others, but it backfires. The four humans bond in bringing themselves to be better than they were. They recognize one another as people who are also seeking to live their lives as best they can, and they realize that they might do much worse than to try to help one another out. As the Good Place's characters learn this, we learn something important about them. It is a lesson that we would do well to heed in this period of profound polarization and mistrust. There is often more to people than our quick summary judgment of them leads us to believe. Eleanor, the dirtbag from Arizona, becomes, through her moral education alongside others, the most morally courageous of the group. There is nothing in the early episodes of the series that would make us predict this, yet her evolution that stems from her relationships with others, especially but not exclusively Chidi, is entirely believable. There is more to her, and more to most people, than our snap judgments would tempt us to think. We can each be better, or at least try to be better, than we currently are, and, relatedly, we should realize that others are often better, or at least might well be better, than we think they are. The essays in this volume approach the Good Place from a variety of philosophical angles, although ethics is never far from the text. The contributing authors engage in conversation with the thinkers one might expect, Sartre, Camus, Nietzsche, Aristotle, and Scanlon among them, developing their ideas in order to bring forward aspects or implications of the show that are either implicit or cannot be treated at length philosophically in the episodes themselves. Let's not forget that The Good Place is a sitcom, complete with fart jokes. Although we cannot canvass those aspects and implications here, after all, that is the job of the essays themselves, perhaps a few quick gestures can indicate the rich resources of the show itself for philosophical reflection. The final episode of the first season, Michael's Gambit, calls to mind the quote from Sartre's No Exit that, "Hell is other people." As several essays argue, and as is evident from the show itself, things are more complicated than those four words might, on their own, lead one to believe. To be sure, Michael designed the Good Place neighborhood with that very idea in mind. The frustration Chidi experiences in trying to teach Eleanor to be good, and the conflict he experiences in keeping her secret, the exasperation Tahani feels in being unable to engage Jason in conversation, and so on, lead to feelings of helplessness and self-torture among the four characters. Nevertheless, as the show develops, we become witness to an alternative. Just as they can make one another miserable, so can they encourage one another to be better. If hell is other people, might it not be that heaven is as well? This theme leads to another one, that of moral development. Several of the essays note the journey of moral development and self-understanding that takes place. Eleanor especially comes to listen to the little voice in her head that warned her when she was about to do something wrong, a voice that she admits to Michael has always been there, but that she had not been willing to pay attention to before. Likewise, Tahani comes to recognize that her feelings toward her sister have been one-sided, and that her sister has had struggles with her parents' expectations complementary to Tahani's own. Being with one another over the course of the Good Place's episodes has fostered these recognitions, and so the characters provide one another opportunities to become better persons, instead of just torturing one another. Another theme that appears in the essays and looms large in the show itself is that of reward and punishment. In the third season, we learn that nobody has gotten into the real good place in 521 years. This is because, as Judge Jen discovers, there are so many unforeseeable consequences of our behavior. It seems impossible to try to be good without thereby causing bad. This raises a question, and it is a question not only for moral reflection, but also for such social institutions as the contemporary prison. How should we think about the ways in which we judge one another? Challenging a simple calculus of good and bad consequences, the show asks us to consider the complexity of our fellow human beings. In a period in which polarization has lent itself to the formation of simple binaries in our assessments of others, the sitcom asks for nuance and grace. Finally, a fourth theme, one that plays an important but sometimes implicit role in the show, is that of our freedom of action, particularly in the contemporary world. If the characters of the show are to be capable of moral development, then they must have the freedom to be able to engage in that development. However, their freedom of action is hedged by the complexity of our world, one in which to buy a rose for a loved one might contribute to exploitation of the workers who picked the rose, climate change through the transportation of the rose, and deforestation if the rose was an element of a farm that cleared forest land in order to create a rose farm that will itself be laid waste. Although the general theme of free will and determinism only appears once in the show, during a conversation between Michael and Eleanor, episode The Worst Possible Use of Free Will, the pressing question of our freedom to be good in a world fraught with unforeseen consequences is an abiding concern throughout. In all, The Good Place offers much food for thought without either spoon-feeding us or, as Wittgenstein worried about, unduly restricting our diet. By raising issues but refusing simple answers, by illustrating theories and dilemmas in ways that are at once provocative and entertaining, by allowing us to follow the moral development of 4 flawed individuals and 1 flawed demon through 4 seasons, the show displays how the reflective work of philosophy can be deep, engaging, and humorous all at once. And it has accomplished the trick that has eluded many of us in the field over these past several thousand years. It makes philosophy cool.
Part 1. I just ethicsed you in the face. 1. How do you like them ethics? David Baggett and Mary Beth Baggett. As NBC's breakout sitcom opens, Eleanor Shellstrop finds herself in a dilemma. She has died, and a cosmic mismanagement lands her in the good place, a secular version of heaven, completely by mistake. Confessing the error will almost certainly mean her removal to the bad place and eternal torture. So what should she do? It is out of this predicament that all the series hijinks ensue. In considering this tension, we find that 2 organically connected questions lie behind this delightful show. 1. Whether morality requires that we do good for goodness' sake, and 2. Whether reality itself is committed to morality. Starring Ted Danson as the demon Michael and Kristen Bell as Eleanor, sweet, teensy, and no freakin' Gandhi, the show blazes a trail of brilliant fun from nature's LASIK to ya basic. As proof that moral philosophy professors aren't as bad as the show's running gag suggests, consider ethicist Chidi Anagonye's Hamilton-style rap musical. My name is Kierkegaard and my writing is impeccable. Check out my teleological suspension of the ethical. Or how one day in class Eleanor dismissively asks, who died and left Aristotle in charge of ethics? To which an exasperated Chidi replies, Plato. Although the show is a comedy, the picture that emerges is one of tragedy, tragicomedy at best. Nobody, it turns out, at the close of Season 3, has made it into the good place for centuries. Not even Doug Forsett is likely to make the cut, even though he's the show's quasi-prophet who accidentally stumbled on the secret of the afterlife and has arguably led a faultless life ever since. The reason for this regrettable situation is life's complexity. Even good-intentioned behavior often results in a number of unintended bad consequences yielding a net loss of points rather than a gain. The relative importance of intentions versus consequences is one of the vital philosophical questions the show raises. After discussing what the show has to say on the matter, we will offer our own view and why, if we're right, the context of The Good Place, it turns out, is much more tragic than comic. Then we will consider the evidence of morality itself to see if it might suggest a different outcome. But enough of this bullshit. It's high time to take a swig from a putrid, disgusting bowl of ethical soup. What makes an action right? Before reviewing how philosophers have answered the intentions and consequences question, let's first consider the question itself. Some might say that actions are neither right nor wrong. The whole enterprise of morality, they suggest, is misguided. Perhaps life is meaningless, or the category of morality is confused. A committed nihilist might insist there's good reason to think there's ultimately nothing to this morality business at all. There are simply no moral truths to be found. This isn't quite the position of Mindy St. Clair when she counsels Eleanor and company not to mess with ethics. Episode Mindy St. Clair. Instead, she advises them to look out for number one. In principle, that leaves open the possibility that she believes in objective morality and that we can know what such morality tells us to do, but that she is simply indifferent to it. Perhaps she sees morality and self-interest as so much at odds that she simply gave up on what morality had to say. As she sees it, the more reliable path to happiness concerns promoting what's best for oneself. Interestingly, the moral theory of ethical egoism says that doing what's in one's own ultimate best interest is our moral obligation. This is one way of maintaining a vital connection between what morality says and what's best for us. There's no particular evidence to suggest that Mindy held such an ethical account. What we know is simply that her life was about making money and doing cocaine, finding what happiness and fulfillment she could in her circumstances. The better representation of a nihilistic approach is what Chidi flirted with after becoming aware of his impending eternal doom in the episode Jeremy Bearimy. Making his vile peep M&M chili concoction in the middle of class, quoting Nietzsche's immortal lines about the death of God, losing heart about morality and meaning, this is the stuff of nihilism commonly understood. Of course, defenders of Nietzsche would quickly suggest it's a bit of a caricature, and they have a point. But we'll leave that interesting discussion to the side for now. Most people still think it's important to consider what makes actions right or wrong. This is the arena of normative ethics, which has two main strains in the history of philosophy. Chidi discusses both of them in his lectures. One is the Kantian idea that what makes an action right is that it comes from the right motive. Immanuel Kant, the first philosopher mentioned in the show, serves as both ethical touchstone and punchline, a lonely, obsessive hermit with zero friends, whose ideas nevertheless challenge the characters to wrestle with fundamental questions of right and wrong. The only truly good thing, he thought, is the good will, which requires that our moral actions be motivated by respect for the moral law. Consequences, on Kant's understanding, don't capture the heart of an action. It's the motive that counts. We should do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not for any other reason, at least if our action is to retain its moral worth. One reason Kant found the emphasis on consequences to be dubious is that we are notoriously bad at predicting them. We might try to do something that will result in a good outcome, but the effort can backfire and we end up doing far more bad than good. So it's not the consequences that matter morally. Obviously, ethical egoists would disagree, but a narrow focus on self-interest alone strikes many as myopic. A broader consequentialism, called utilitarianism, says an action is right if it produces the best overall consequences for all who are affected by an action. The philosophical nerd best known for being horny for utilitarianism is John Stuart Mill. Whereas Kant put the moral focus on intention, Mill generally put it squarely on consequences. Chidi's lecture on Mill has Eleanor initially enamored of utilitarianism's simplicity. Jason's convoluted but surprisingly apropos example of framing one innocent gator dealer to save a 60-person dance crew, notwithstanding. Mill did see the possibility that a good-intentioned
Sample complete. Ready to continue?